change, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious leaders, innovators, and people who are ready for the next level and beyond.
Great opportunity for us to talk about a lot of cool things regarding the Pure Reinvention Project. I want to welcome as our guest Dirk Milliman. Dirk, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mike.
And as a special feature, I'd like for everyone to welcome Misty Elliott.
Thanks, Mike. I'm glad to be here.
I first had a chance to meet Dirk Milliman when we were together doing a lot of meetings for the Michigan Press Association. And one of the things I became very impressed with Dirk was his ownership of the current set of challenges. Dirk, can you tell me in your own words why you became involved and so aware of the reinvention process?
Good question. I have been involved in the Michigan Press Association forever. I've been the president of the association. I've been the president of the revenue arm of the association. I've been president of the foundation. I do legislative and lobbying work with the association, and it has a special place in my life. It's my biggest volunteer activity, and I live here in the Lansing area, so I think I'm a sucker for for volunteer work.
Well, I think then that's an important understanding as people are listening to this podcast, that Dirk is the owner of Milliman Communications, an organization which owns multiple newspapers around the state of Michigan, and as a board member is also responsible for producing payroll for his organization. He provides an interesting perspective then as an owner of a business to be sitting on the board of the Michigan Press Association. Dirk, as you've watched during multiple board meetings, both within the Michigan Press Association and others, can you speak for a minute about how you've observed the role of ownership at the board level?
It's I think the board membership is a changing dynamic. It used to be back in the good old days. All the associations would be staffed at the board level by owners of companies. Those would be your board members, and those would be the right people to get to be your board members. I think as the economy has changed and the marketplace has changed and the world has changed, we get different board members now. Not all owners want to give their time to be board members, so they will delegate to somebody in their company to fill that seat on the board, which brings a different perspective. You're not looking at the organization like you would as an owner. You know, you're an employee in your job. You're not tasked with making budget, developing a budget, making ends meet. You get a paycheck. Whereas an owner is developing payroll, making sure that ends meet, that everything meets budget. And it brings a different perspective to those board seats. And therefore, you get a different direction of your board a lot of times. It turns into a lot of times more brainstorming. Lots of ideas, lots of good ideas. Let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. The key is who is the let's. It's hard to find people to take ownership of a project from beginning to end because everybody's busy, and serving on a volunteer board is not your main priority. Your job is your main priority, and then probably your family, and your volunteer stuff is beyond that. The other thing is it has to be profitable. It has to make money. It has to make sense, and not all great ideas can be made profitable or make sense.
I agree 100% that it seems like the role of ownership is an incredibly important trait for a board member to have. I want to follow up a little bit on the comment you made, Dirk, which I think is really interesting. You see a lot of board members who feel like it's their role to brainstorm a lot of ideas for the organization to consider. Yet, at the end of the day, the business has to focus or simplify around a core key idea. Can you share your thoughts on how boards need to be better about creating clarity and focus?
Part of the issue to creating clarity I think, and focus is the board has to be willing to delegate and to trust the full-time professional people that actually run the boards, run the organizations that the boards are serving. Not every idea needs to be a board-generated idea. I mean, the people who sit in the upstairs of the buildings and run the organizations should know what they're doing and should be responsible for the direction of the organization. And it should be a board function to clearly state, here's what we expect from you as our leader. And I'm not talking about the volunteer president, the figurehead who serves every year or 2 years, the paid professional staff person. Here's what we expect from you. We expect this to be profitable. We expect it to be forward-thinking. We expect to serve members. We expect it to attract members. And these are all your responsibilities. It can't be much simpler than that, I don't think.
And so you are an advocate that the more simple the understanding of what the key role is, the more the greater the progress that can be made towards those end results.
I am.
Can you real briefly describe how disruption played into a part of Michigan Press Association needing to redefine its role going forward?
Sure. The disruption here at the Michigan Press Association came about as a financial disruption. The things we were doing financially were not working. The model was not working anymore. And for about the past 4, 5, 6, 10 years, there was enough cash flow to cover those problems. But all of a sudden the cash flow is gone, and now you're waking up in the morning saying, ooh, how are we going to meet payroll next month? And that can be very disruptive.
That's a great topic to talk about. So the what's next question. Basically, you said you were running along just fine, and all of a sudden you woke up one morning and said, oh no, what's next? And I think that's a key question to ask in the reinvention process, looking forward. So when you're talking about disruption and trying to figure out how to harness that anarchy that disruption kind of makes, and we were just talking about simplifying things, and I really like that you were saying how it's important to delegate. How do you thread those three big pieces together, disruption, simplification, and delegation, with the people that should be owners of this process?
Mm-hmm. Well, to go back to your first statement, what's the first thing you do? All of a sudden you have a crisis. What do? The choices, I think, are either you change, you adapt, or you shut the doors. You decide that there's no need to exist anymore. And I think most organizations, not all of them, but most organizations will say, well, there's a real purpose for us. Our organization is good, so let's keep it going. Let's figure out how to do that. We certainly can't do it the way we've been doing it. Let's figure out a better way to do it. And so you put some minds together, and I think one of the keys is that it can't be all minds from inside. One of the things that the Press Association did was we worked with an outside person who brought a whole different perspective to our problems, instead of us looking at it internally, looking at it from an outside perspective, and also keeping us on track, keeping us moving, because we're all volunteers and we all have other things to do, and we put in our time and then we go back to our lives while things here in the middle continue to, the Titanic keeps going down. Somebody's got to be putting the lifeboats in the water.
That's where the delegation comes in, right?
Yes, the delegation comes in there, but also the help, having somebody looking at it from a different perspective, which I think was very helpful for us. It was very helpful for us.
So Dirk, as you look at the next steps that are important for the Michigan Press Association to go through, which now that the disruption has taken place and you're working on the ownership of the solutions, how does the board and management in this new environment commit to moving forward, commit to meaningful progress moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me back up real quick, because I think one of the things that was very helpful for us to do here was that we, instead of asking everybody to help, we slimmed it down to a very core group that could dedicate their time and efforts to focusing on figuring out where we are, how do we get here, how do we stop this sinking, and then sharing those ideas with the bigger group. So we went small first and then tried to include more people to get a little bit more buy-in. Mm-hmm. So I think if it is purposeful disruption, you have to be moving forward afterwards, and your boards have to have a different mindset. Most people get on a board in a trade association like ours because it's an honor. It's kind of an honorary position. You spend your time working at committees and things, and all of a sudden you're asked to be on the board. Ooh, that's cool. But there's a lot involved in it, especially in a disruptive period, because things aren't the same. You're not on the same course that you were on before. You have to change direction or close the doors. If the choice is to change direction, that means change behavior. You're gonna have to do things differently. There has to be more board involvement, but yet there has to be more hands-off with the board and more trust with the CEO and an executive to follow the direction of the board, keep the organization moving in the right direction.
You bring up a really good point, and I want to follow up on this word you use, this word called purposeful disruption. I guess that's really two words, but it was very purposeful that the board has started to behave in different ways. That the disruption, while uncomfortable, was not a surprise. And in fact, became the reason for what had to happen next. As you simplified, took ownership and then simplified the process, you began to understand, as an owner, what needed to take place next. Mm-hmm. Dirk, how do you get other board members who are not as invested in the information and not as invested in the outcome, but are responsible for the decision making? How do you get those board members who weren't as close to the information and weren't as close to the ownership to participate to the level where they feel comfortable making the decisions that need to be made?
Well, a lot of that comes from the small starting group and involving a good, constant exchange of information, making sure everybody's aware of what's going on, making sure everybody's aware of what the problems were, and making sure everybody is aware that there needs to be a change of direction. And a lot of that information comes from top down, but it also comes from bottom up. You get the peers involved. You pick a core group, an involved group, people that understand, and you explain it to them and have them work with their peers, other board members, directors, to understand that it's not 2 hours every quarter anymore. You have to put more time into this. We can't just come to board meetings and everybody vote yes on everything and pass the agenda. We have to set some different directions and use some different markers on how we gauge whether we're successful or not.
I like your concept of the value of peer-to-peer communication and peer-to-peer leadership. I don't think that's been a new concept for you in the way you do business, and I think that's been, to a large degree, why you've been successful. Have you seen a lot of peer-to-peer leadership in your board experiences?
I have, yep. I don't think that it's going to be just specific to the Press Association. I think that most organizations are going to have good peer-to-peer communication because it's a trade group. Everybody's in that same boat. They're all trying to meet payroll. They're all trying to figure out the newest and best way to do whatever it is that their organization does.
This is very interesting, and I truly love that you've touched on that it takes a core group to get this started, because I think that that's a key component of the process. You get those people together that say something has to change. We don't want to close our doors. We need to change. And so given that core group, now I'm going to give you the tough questions here. That couldn't have been a every meeting rosy, happy-go-lucky. Everybody had the same ideas on how to answer the what's next question. So can you share with us some of the real work involved in getting people on board and ideas that came up?
I think the hardest part of our purposeful disruption was the financial part, and getting people to understand the numbers, how we got where we were, what the problem was. Well, everything was great. We were passing budgets every year. We were giving bonuses every year, but there wasn't any money. How did that happen? So it took probably the first 6-7 meetings, I'm guessing, these are 3 or 4 hour meetings, just looking at numbers and trying to figure out how we got numerically, financially, in this predicament that we were in. And then once you figure out where you are, okay, we're at this level. If we keep going at this level, it's going to go down. We need to go up. How do we do that quickly? So you had to have some quick buy-in that way too. But our core group, which was 3 people, had a bigger group, which was 15 people, all volunteered to work on this problem. And most of those people were in, I would say, owner mindset, looking at it like an owner would. And if it was their own business, it's not, but if it was, they looked at it that way instead of from an employee standpoint. There wasn't a lot of discussion about, let's try this, let's try this. It wasn't a lot of brainstorming. It was more nitty-gritty, right down to work. How do we stop this bleeding, and where do we go from here? So our core group identified a group of immediate, quick owners that we could help to use as that in that peer communication, so that it wasn't all coming from top down. It wasn't all rhetoric from the association. It was filtering up from the bottom, at the cocktail parties, at the receptions, in the emails, the groups, the people who carpool to the meetings together, who have 4 hours to talk about the situation. They're all communicating with each other because we all share common background. We're all in the same business together. It's a very dynamic and changing business, so we're all kind of used to this disruption.
You brought up a very interesting point, Dirk, and that is the momentum that one starts to create. In the beginning, the momentum was to just do triage and make sure you stopped any further bleeding, any red ink. But then you started talking about how you start to build a different kind of momentum. In the early stages of the process, the momentum might have been negative. Oh, look at all the problems we have to deal with. I believe now you're beginning to describe for us that the tone of the conversation is changing, and that people are now talking about something different. Can you tell us what they're talking about now?
Well, originally, and this is a reaction like most businesses have, when things get tight, you cut, and you cut, and you cut, and you cut. And this organization was cut down to the bone. There wasn't any more room to cut. There were no more cuts to be made. And you can't cut yourself to health. You have to grow. And our group is now talking about, we're not talking about, we've contracted with an outside company to help us generate revenue, and we've targeted some of our, what we think are going to be quick turnaround revenue projects. We found the right help to contract with to raise the revenue at these things. We're talking about fast money-making projects that we can do. We've got a stopgap in where we're not going to lose money anymore, but some of the revenue projects, there wasn't enough staff, there wasn't enough meat on the bone to actually do anything else. So we had to go outside to find expertise, and in an area like this, you can find lots of expertise.
When you say, I think it's great that you look for the outside help, and seeking that diverse opinion is critical too, because not everybody is going to give you the same advice. So what does the right outside help look like to you and to that core group of people that was looking for it?
I think it's what our group looked for outside was somebody expert in their field, but not expert in our field. Somebody to look at things, what we were doing, with a different set of eyes. If you talk to our group about the Michigan Press Association, we think we're great. Of course, every group thinks they're great. But if you go downtown Lansing and talk to people about the Michigan Press Association, what are you going to find there? And we've found a group that we've contracted with that's helping us raise money for our annual convention, finding sponsors, going out and telling the story about the Press Association and seeing what the response is out in the marketplace. And people like the story, and people want to be involved, and that makes the Press Association have a better opinion of itself. Like, it wasn't high enough already, but it makes it have a better opinion of itself because people want to be involved.
That's such a wonderful exposure to have, where instead of the conversation being, woe is us, what are we going to do, you now start to have this whole nother momentum of people talking positive. You're starting to really understand what the true value is to the Michigan Press Association, or to any association in general, and to really begin to take what could have been a very serious situation. And actually, Dirk, within a very short period of time, you and your group, through your leadership, was able to not only turn the conversation around, but actually build very quickly momentum in a very positive way to start attracting a whole nother way of doing business, which becomes your foundation for your whole next generation of opportunity. And I give you a lot of credit as a core leader for creating that ability to have peer-to-peer conversations, to challenge each other. I watched you as a group work together and learn from each other and push each other and support each other, and at the end of the day, congratulate each other for being able to take and make such a difference.
Mm-hmm. Thank you,
and
Mike.
That is a true test of ownership.
Well, part of the key to that was that you made us get in the room together. It had to be done face to face. It couldn't be done over the phone. It couldn't be done by email or Skype. If we need people involved, and you have to be here. It was, we have a crisis and we need your help. And we had people respond.
You did, and it's very interesting. When you really become very honest in what is really happening, you do see a response. And it was very exciting to see the ownership from around the table as you crafted your own solution that was, that you knew you could communicate to your peers could understand it, your peers would support it, your peers would not only endorse it, but they would start to take ownership of it and move it forward. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful process, and Dirk, you've been a wonderful, wonderful leader in that. I want to thank Dirk for being our guest today. I want to thank Misty for her role. As many of you may be aware, hearing my voice is sometimes getting to be a little old, and Misty adds a wonderful dimension. This has been the Pure Reinvention Project. Make sure you follow us on our Facebook page. Remember, our website, www.purereinvention.com, and as always, you can find us on Twitter. So, Misty, what did we learn on our conversation with Dirk?
We learned so much. I really loved that he used the word purposeful disruption, and I think it's critical to call it purposeful, because if there's disruption without any ownership and anyone there to catch the outcome of that disruption, you can't just tip over the apple cart. You have to be able to pick the apples back up in a way that makes sense. And he touched on the fact that they knew that they were disrupting, but they had a set outcome.
I think that's so true that, as you said, the disruption doesn't necessarily need to be negative or positive, but it needs to be purposeful. That there has to be an understanding you're not doing it just because, but it's going to help you get a little off center and open up the opportunity to go to the next step, which is to find those critical key leaders like Dirk who took ownership of the problem, who really was able to say, I'm willing to invest the time to be part of the solution. So many times you get into a board meeting and you see a lot of people offering brainstorming ideas and suggestions, but you really don't see the ownership or the application. They're nice ideas, but they really don't allow for the ownership necessary. And Dirk really explained how important it was for a board member to really take ownership and really think through, could you really apply that, and could you really make money on that idea that you were talking about? Which brings up this really whole other interesting next step, which is we have to really work hard at getting our message simple. We have to get to the point where, as a business or as a board, simple is better.
And Dirk really touched on that even without saying the word simple when he kept going back to that core group. They kept it simple from the beginning. They started by tearing away the big group, the big bulk of ideas, and simply cutting to the core. And he said core group, we went back to the core group, and then we reached out to a larger group, and that was all about simplifying what they wanted to come out of this change for the Michigan Press Association.
I think sometimes in our quest to solve problems, we put too complicated a solution in place, and I think Dirk has reaffirmed our core belief, which is you really can't understand what you're dealing with until you simplify it to the point where everyone can start to take ownership. And Dirk's message was dead on, that simplifying it to a core group of key leaders who could take ownership of it in this particular application was the key. Misty, he also talked about the role of a third-party navigator in this process. What did he say?
I think I remember him saying something about the outside help was critical. He may have not used quite that word, but he certainly meant it in the examples he brought up. Incorporating that third party to bring different ideas to the table, to push out the expand the network and where they were looking for answers was really important. And sometimes you can't do that when you already have hold yourself in high esteem and have a pretty high regard for yourself as an association.
You know, many times you hear the phrase, if you can't find something, take a step back and broaden your viewpoint so you can really begin to understand. And I think the role of that third-party navigator is to bring that kind of that stepped back look, a little bit different vantage point. We sometimes get a little too close to the problem and really can't see the solutions that are available to us because we're so focused and we've used up all of our bandwidth on what the problem is as opposed to working towards a solution. And I think Dirk reminded us of how important the help was.
And that's just another way to simplify the process. When you have somebody that can walk you through the weeds and really help you find some clarity, that help is just invaluable.
Ms. Elliott, thank you very much for your contribution. This has been a wonderful experience for me.
Thanks, I learned a lot today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new episodes are available by following us on Twitter @Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.